The first crack in my marriage wasn't a loud explosion. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation or a tearful confession. No, it was quiet, subtle, the kind of thing you don't notice until it's already too late. It started with a perfume I didn't recognize. I remember that moment so clearly, how the scent hit me when I walked into the house that evening. It wasn't hers. Lillian had always worn the same soft floral fragrance for as long as I'd known her. But this was different. It was sharp, bold, the kind of scent that made a statement. And for some reason, it sent a chill down my spine. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she bought a new one. Maybe a coworker's perfume had rubbed off on her. People change things all the time, right? But then I noticed the other things. The way she started leaving the house earlier in the morning, but still coming home late. The way her phone was suddenly always face down. The way she laughed at her texts, but never shared what was so funny. I tried to ignore it, but doubt has a way of creeping into the cracks of your mind and taking root. That night, I sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen, my untouched dinner growing cold in front of me. She was late again. I told myself not to check the clock, but I did again and again. Then, at exactly 10:42 p.m., my phone lit up. "Hey, I'm staying over at Jenna's tonight. Don't wait up." I read the text 3 times, my stomach twisting into knots. Lillian didn't have a friend named Jenna. I placed the phone down slowly, staring at it as if it might reveal more. My heartbeat was steady, unnaturally calm, but something in my chest felt hollow. This was it, wasn't it? The moment everything changed. I didn't call her, didn't text back, didn't rage or demand an explanation. Instead, I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked out the door. Not to chase after her, not to find proof of what I already knew. I walked away because deep down I realized I didn't need to hear the lies. I already knew the truth. I wish I could say I was shocked, that my heart dropped, my world shattered, and I had to steady myself against the counter to keep from falling. But none of that happened. Instead, I felt nothing. A strange, eerie calm settled over me as I stood there, staring at the message like it was just another reminder to take out the trash. Maybe it was because deep down I already knew. The signs had been there for months. Little things I ignored, small shifts I brushed off as stress, work, or just the natural drift that happens in long relationships. But this was different. She had lied to my face, and she didn't even try that hard. Lillian didn't have a friend named Jenna. That wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how lazy the lie was. Like, she didn't expect me to question it. Like, she knew I wouldn't. I glanced around the kitchen. Everything looked exactly as I had left it that morning. The half-empty coffee cup still sat on the counter, the mail untouched. The faint scent of the cinnamon candle she loved still lingering in the air. It felt staged, like a memory frozen in time. But I wasn't part of it anymore. I should have been angry. I should have grabbed my phone and called her, demanded an answer, caught her in the act. That's what a normal man would do, right? But I wasn't normal anymore. Something inside me had shifted. Instead, I walked out the door. The night air was crisp, wrapping around me as I stepped onto the sidewalk. I had no plan, no destination. I just started walking, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, my breath coming in slow, steady exhales. The streets were quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic. The world kept moving, indifferent to the fact that my marriage had just ended. I passed the coffee shop where we used to go on lazy Sunday mornings, the bookstore where she once spent hours browsing, the small Italian restaurant where I proposed. Each place held a memory, a piece of our life together, but none of them felt real anymore. And then, before I even realized where my feet had taken me, I was standing in front of a bar, not the kind I usually went to. This one was dimly lit, tucked between 2 buildings like it was trying to hide. A neon sign buzzed above the entrance, casting a dull glow onto the sidewalk. I hesitated for half a second before pushing the door open. Inside it was quiet, just a few scattered patrons nursing their drinks, lost in their own thoughts. I slid onto a stool at the bar, nodding at the bartender. "Whiskey," I said, my voice steady. The glass was in front of me within seconds. I wrapped my fingers around it, staring at the amber liquid, watching the way the light caught the edges. I didn't drink often, but tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't the man I used to be. Tonight, I was someone else. Someone who didn't need to argue. Someone who didn't need to beg for answers he already knew. I lifted the glass to my lips and took a slow sip. And just like that, I let go of the life I thought I had. The whiskey burned, but I welcomed it. I let the warmth spread through my chest, let it settle deep in my bones. It was the only thing that felt real at that moment. Everything else, my marriage, my home, the years I had poured into building a life with Lillian, felt distant, like a dream I had woken up from too late. The bartender, a man who looked like he had seen his fair share of lost souls nursing drinks at his counter, leaned in slightly. "Rough night?" he asked, not unkindly. I let out a breath, barely a chuckle. "Something like that." He nodded like he understood more than I was saying and went back to wiping down the counter. I appreciated that. No pity, no questions, just space. I stared at my reflection in the mirror behind the bar, at the man looking back at me. Same face, same eyes, but something was different. I looked hollow, not broken, not angry, just empty. A soft murmur of voices drifted through the bar. Low conversations, the clink of glasses, the hum of a life I was no longer a part of. A couple sat at the far end, leaning into each other, lost in their own world. A man in a wrinkled suit scrolled through his phone with a look of exhaustion. A woman a few seats down was stirring her drink absent-mindedly, her eyes distant, lost in a memory. We were all here for different reasons, yet somehow the same. People looking for an escape, a moment to breathe, a pause before reality caught up again. I took another sip, slower this time. I wasn't rushing anything. I wasn't trying to drink the pain away. I was just existing. The thought hit me then, sharp and sudden. What was she doing right now? Was she laughing with him? Was she whispering into his ear the way she used to with me? Was she even thinking about me at all? I gripped the glass a little tighter. I wasn't stupid. I had been through enough in life to know that people change. That love isn't always enough to keep two people together. But this wasn't about change. This was about deceit. About the fact that she had looked me in the eyes, kissed me goodbye in the mornings, and still gone behind my back like I was nothing. I exhaled through my nose, forcing the thought away. It didn't matter anymore. She had made her choice. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, I was making mine. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to fight for something that had already slipped through my fingers. I was done. I pushed the empty glass forward, nodding at the bartender. One more. This time, the sip felt different. Not like drowning, not like numbing myself, but like a quiet toast to the past. A silent goodbye to the man I had been. And for the first time that night, I felt something close to peace. I didn't remember leaving the bar, but I remembered the cold, that biting late-night chill that seeped into my bones as I stepped out onto the quiet street. The city had settled into its after-hours rhythm. Restaurants dimming their lights, distant sirens wailing from somewhere I'd never know. The occasional laughter of strangers echoing through the air. It was strange how everything could feel so normal when my entire world had cracked open just hours before. I started walking, letting my feet carry me without direction. The streets felt endless, stretching out in front of me like an uncertain future. I wasn't thinking about Lillian. I wasn't thinking about where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. At least that's what I told myself. But every step I took was another reminder that I was alone, that I had just walked away from a life I had spent years building. At some point, I found myself standing outside a 24-hour diner, the kind with flickering neon signs and the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. I had been here before, years ago, with Lillian, back when we were just two broke kids laughing over cheap pancakes at 2 a.m. Back when I thought forever actually meant something. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The place was nearly empty, except for an old man in the corner nursing a cup of coffee and a waitress who looked like she had seen one too many long nights. She barely glanced up as I slid into a booth near the window. A menu was in front of me, but I wasn't really reading it. My mind felt foggy, not from the whiskey, but from the weight of everything I hadn't fully processed yet. This was real. I wasn't going home to Lillian tonight. Maybe ever. Can I get you something, Han? The waitress had shuffled over, her notepad already in hand. I looked up at her. She was older, maybe late 50s, with tired eyes and a kind smile. The kind of woman who had probably seen 100 men like me sit in this very booth, staring at nothing, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Coffee, I said finally. Black. She nodded, scribbling it down like it was some complex order. Rough night. I let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. You could say that. She didn't press for details, just poured the coffee and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat sink into my fingers. For a long time, I just sat there watching the steam rise from the cup, listening to the quiet hum of the diner. I could hear Lillian's voice in my head, soft and teasing, saying, "You always drink coffee too late. You'll never sleep." Funny how the things you miss aren't always the big moments, but the little ones, the casual remarks, the inside jokes, the routines you didn't even realize were special. I didn't check my phone. I didn't want to know if she had texted. I didn't want to see some half-hearted excuse or worse, nothing at all. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulling out my wallet. Tucked inside, behind a couple of crumpled bills and an old receipt, was a small folded piece of paper. It had been there for years, worn at the edges, something I had carried with me without really thinking about it. I unfolded it slowly. It was a note written in Lillian's handwriting. No matter what, I choose you. Promise, a lie, a relic from a different time. I stared at the words for a long time before folding the paper back up and placing it on the table beside my coffee. Then, without another thought, I slid out of the booth, walked to the counter, and left it there, right next to the tip. Some things weren't worth carrying anymore. The night had settled into that strange in-between state where time felt neither fast nor slow, just suspended. The city was quieter now, almost eerily so, and the streets, which had been alive just a few hours ago, were now empty, except for the occasional car passing by. The coffee I had just finished in the diner lingered on my tongue, bitter and grounding. But it didn't do much to clear the fog in my head. I had no plan, no destination, just a vague sense that I couldn't go back to where I had come from. Not yet, maybe not ever. The thing about nights like this is that they make you confront yourself in ways you don't expect. As I walked, I caught glimpses of my reflection in the darkened windows of closed shops. I looked the same, but I wasn't. Something had shifted. The kind of shift you can't put into words, but feel in your bones. I wasn't the same man who had woken up that morning, kissed his wife on the cheek, and gone about his day as if everything was fine. Everything wasn't fine. The thought hit me again. Where was she now? Was she curled up next to him, whispering things in his ear that she used to say to me, laughing at the same jokes I once made? I shook my head, pushing the thoughts away. They didn't matter. Not anymore. At some point, I found myself standing in front of a small park. It was empty, the swing swaying slightly in the breeze, the street lights casting long, tired shadows over the pavement. Without really thinking, I walked over to one of the benches and sat down. It had been years since I'd sat on a park bench at this hour, doing nothing but existing. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, watching as a stray leaf drifted across the pavement. The world felt strangely still, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then my phone buzzed. I hesitated. I had spent the last few hours avoiding it, unwilling to see whatever excuse, explanation, or lie was waiting for me. But now, in the quiet of the night, I found myself reaching for it. One new message. I stared at the screen for a moment before opening it. Lillian, I know you're mad, but please just come home. Come home. 2 words that once would have brought me comfort. Now they just felt hollow. I didn't reply. I just sat there letting the weight of everything sink in. The truth was, I didn't know where home was anymore, because it sure as hell wasn't the place where she had decided I wasn't enough. For the first time in years, I realized something. I had nowhere to be, and somehow that felt more freeing than it did terrifying. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that message. The words were simple, almost gentle. Come home. But there was no apology, no explanation, just an expectation. I imagined her in our house. No, not our house. My house. I imagined her curled up on the couch. The same couch we picked out together, probably waiting for me to walk through the door like nothing had happened. Maybe she'd have that fake look of concern, the one she used when she wanted to manipulate me. Maybe she wouldn't even look up from her phone, assuming I'd fall in line like I always had. The thought made my stomach turn. I used to believe that love was about patience, that when you truly loved someone, you forgave. You worked through things. You fought for them. But what if they didn't fight for you? What if they had already decided you weren't worth it long before you even realized there was a battle to be fought? My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could have asked her why. I could have confronted her, demanded the truth, made her admit to the things I already knew. But for what? So she could lie to my face one last time? No. I was done playing her game. I turned off my phone and shoved it back into my pocket. The park was quiet, the wind cool against my skin. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, staring at the pavement. For the first time in years, I had no obligations, no place I had to be, no one expecting anything from me. And for some reason, that terrified me more than anything. I had built my entire life around being someone's husband, around routines, traditions, anniversaries, and inside jokes and Sunday morning coffee runs. Around the idea that no matter what, at the end of the day, I had a home to return to, a person who was mine. But now I was just a man sitting alone in a park with nothing but a phone full of unanswered messages and a heart that felt like it had been hollowed out with a dull knife. I stood up suddenly, shoving my hands into my jacket pockets. I needed to move, to go somewhere. But where? Back to that bar? Another late-night diner? A cheap motel? Just so I wouldn't have to sleep in my car like some pathetic cliché? No, I needed something real, something that didn't feel like a half-hearted attempt at distracting myself. So, without really thinking about it, I started walking. The streets were mostly empty, the occasional street light flickering above me. I didn't know exactly where I was headed, but my feet seemed to. It wasn't until I reached the old bridge, our bridge, that I realized where I had been going all along. We used to come here all the time. Late at night, when the world felt too loud, when life got messy, when we just needed to breathe, we'd sit on the ledge, feet dangling over the water, watching the city lights flicker on the surface below. I stared at the spot where we used to sit. Funny how places hold memories, even when the people are gone. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the dark water. The reflection of the city shimmered, broken by ripples, never quite still. That's how I felt, distorted, fragmented, never fully at peace. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against something small and familiar. That folded piece of paper. No matter what, I choose you. A quiet laugh escaped my lips. I pulled it out, unfolding it one last time. The ink was faded, the edges worn. A relic from another life. A promise that had meant everything once and now meant absolutely nothing. Without hesitating, I let it go. The wind caught it, carrying it over the railing, sending it floating down toward the water below. I watched as it twisted and turned. A tiny, insignificant thing swallowed by the vastness of the night. And just like that, I let her go, too. I turned away from the bridge, my steps lighter than they had been in weeks. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. I had nowhere to be, yet I kept walking. The city at night has a different kind of rhythm that you don't notice unless you're alone in it. The silence isn't really silent. It's filled with the distant hum of street lights, the occasional honk of a car that shouldn't be out this late, the scuff of my own footsteps against the cracked pavement. The night wasn't lonely. It was just indifferent. The world didn't care that my life had fallen apart a few hours ago. Kept turning unbothered. I passed by places that used to mean something. The tiny record shop where Lillian and I had spent an entire afternoon arguing over what album to buy. The bookstore where she used to get lost between shelves, running her fingers along the spines like they were old friends. The little bakery with the awful coffee, but the best cinnamon rolls in the city. She loved those. All of it was still here, still exactly the same. The only thing missing was us. I stopped in front of a 24-hour convenience store. The flickering fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a harsh glow onto the empty sidewalk. I wasn't hungry, but I went inside anyway. The place smelled like floor cleaner and stale chips. The clerk barely glanced at me as I walked in, glued to his phone, the faint sound of some game humming from the tiny speaker. The store was empty except for me, shelves stocked with things I didn't need. I wandered aimlessly, picking up a pack of gum, then setting it back down. My fingers traced over the bottled drinks, the rows of snacks, the old magazines no one ever really bought. I wasn't here for food. I wasn't here for anything really. And then I saw it. A cheap disposable camera hanging from a hook near the register. I stared at it for a long moment. It was one of those outdated things people didn't use anymore. The kind you had to take to a store to develop, never knowing what the pictures would look like until days later. The kind we used to take on road trips, snapping blurry shots of sunsets and gas station stops, laughing when half the photos turned out terrible. I reached for it before I could talk myself out of it. The clerk rang me up without a word, barely looking up from his screen. A few seconds later, I was back outside holding a plastic bag with nothing but a camera inside. It was stupid, pointless, and yet it felt like the first decision I had made all night that was entirely mine. I walked for another hour, turning down unfamiliar streets, letting the city pull me along like a current. Somewhere along the way, I took the camera out, winding the film with that satisfying little click-click before lifting it to my eye. The first picture I took was of the empty street ahead of me, the glow of a distant traffic light, the stretch of pavement disappearing into the dark. I didn't know why, but it felt important. The second was a faded mural on the side of a building, half covered in graffiti, something beautiful and broken all at once. The third was of a stray cat sitting on the hood of an abandoned car, watching me with cautious eyes. I kept walking, kept snapping pictures, not of anything important, not of anything special, just things. Things that existed, things that had nothing to do with her. By the time I reached the edge of the city, the camera was almost full. I stopped at a gas station, bought a cheap motel room for the night, and tossed my phone onto the bed without checking it. I didn't want to see her name, didn't want to read whatever excuse she was crafting. Instead, I sat by the tiny window, looking out at the highway, listening to the faint rumble of cars passing by. I wound the camera one last time. Then, without thinking, I turned the lens on myself. A click, a flash, a moment captured. Not for her, not for anyone, just for me. Morning came quietly. I expected to wake up feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The anger, the betrayal, the hollow ache of losing something I had spent years building. But when I opened my eyes, all I felt was stillness. Not quite peace, but something close. The cheap motel room smelled faintly of stale air and detergent. Sunlight filtered in through the thin curtains, casting long streaks of gold across the bed. I sat up, rubbing my hands over my face, and for the first time in a long time I realized something. I wasn't thinking about her. Lillian had consumed so much of my life, my thoughts, my decisions. But in this moment, she wasn't the first thing on my mind. That meant something. I stood up, stretching, feeling the stiffness in my muscles from walking all night. My phone sat untouched on the nightstand, still face down. I knew there were messages waiting for me, maybe even missed calls, but I didn't reach for it. Instead, I reached for the disposable camera. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the slight weight of the captured moments inside. They weren't moments of heartbreak or regret. They weren't tied to her. They were mine. Snapshots of a night where I had been forced to let go of the past and walk forward, even if I didn't know where I was going. I threw on my jacket, grabbed my things, and walked out the door. The air was crisp, fresh in a way that only early mornings can be. The city was waking up, coffee shops unlocking their doors, street vendors setting up, people heading to wherever life was pulling them. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't stuck in place. I wasn't waiting. I stopped at a small pharmacy and handed over the camera. The woman behind the counter gave me a curious glance as she bagged it up for processing. "Kind of old school, huh?" she said with a small smile. I grinned back. "Yeah, but sometimes you got to go old school." She handed me the receipt. Photos will be ready in a couple of days. I nodded, thanked her, and stepped back outside. For years, my life had revolved around Lillian, around what we were, what we built, what we planned for the future. But now, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't living for we. I was living for me. And that thought didn't scare me anymore. I didn't know where I was going next. Maybe I'd take a road trip, drive without a destination, just see where the highway led. Maybe I'd find a quiet place by the ocean, let the waves drown out the echoes of the past. Or maybe I'd stay right here for a while, let life unfold naturally, without force, without expectation. Whatever it was, it would be mine. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the morning air. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light, free. And as I stepped forward, leaving the past behind me, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something.